Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is our Kenya Investment Summit. We should be able to start in a minute. So whoever is getting in, we can do any start. My name is Paul Kamau. I'll be facilitating the summit for today. I'm a director with a company called Finaltus based in Kenya. Finaltus, we are a licensed investment and transaction advisory firm offering our services to multiple countries in diverse industries. And what we do, we are mandated from investment firms, listed companies, family houses, in terms of we support investment journeys. So we are constructed by investors or investees to help in valuation, due diligence, getting second opinion, capital raising, as well as offering technical capacity post and pre-investment. Though based in Kenya, we have mandates that have spanned across different countries. We talk about Zambia, Malawi, Uganda, Rwanda, Ghana. And so we are here just to discuss about Kenya, and we're here to discuss about the various opportunities that exist. Kenya is unique. Kenya is a country that, for nothing else, we lie along the equator. That means that we have fair weather across the 365 days a year. We also have, it's one of the countries that we pride ourselves that we have stable governments. It's democratic. We always have change of government, which is a clear indication that people respect the institutions. It's also a country that is always used as a hub, because one of the things that the median age is quite young, and also the population in terms of education, in terms of technology, in terms of skills, is sophisticated enough. You can always fly to any capital city of Africa from Nairobi any day. Kenya Airways and other airlines always serves. For example, Finaltus, though headquartered in Nairobi, we can always go to any assignment any day and without any challenges. And that's one of the good things about Kenya. Quite stable in terms of technology, in terms of financial sector, is well developed. But to say much about the country and what are the investment opportunities, I'll be able to call different experts and different people who have diverse investments in Kenya to come and share in this podium. At some point, we are going to give an opportunity for you to ask questions. Yes, an opportunity for you to ask the question. And let's make it interactive enough. We're going to start with the representative of the UK government. She's a trade envoy to Kenya. She also sits in the International Development Select Committee in the UK Parliament. Honorable Tio Clark. Fica salvo. Next on the panel is Charlie. He's the CEO of Maris Limited. Charlie co-founded Maris in 2009 and is the director of the Maris Limited. He oversees the group from East Africa. Before establishing the company, he developed a successive portfolio of venture businesses in Afghanistan and East Africa. He has worked in various sections, including investment banking in London, after graduating from University of Edinburgh. Welcome. Then the next on stage is Adi. He's the CEO of Poa Internet. Poa in Kiswahili is a Kiswahili word of cool. So we can say his company is cool, just cool. CEO of Poa Internet is an ISVP bridging the digital divide by providing affordable internet to underserved communities in Kenya. Poa goal is to accelerate education, economic growth, and social inclusion by connecting the hundreds of millions of Africans without internet. We have Graham Shaw. He's the CEO of Wilken Telecommunications Limited that has operated in East Africa since 1963 and has operations in ICT, aviation, and before 2008, he led in successful expansion of Highway Africa. And Kenya being his birthplace, he always returns there, and he has done a lot of investment work, including being a board member of British Chamber of Commerce in Kenya.
Have to give the Kenyan context.
Then I have okay. Then I have Madeline Withiga. She co-founded Adapter in 2020. She oversees Africa operations as managing director of Adapter, a climate adaptation finance facility that is working with financial institutions in Africa to de-risk agricultural lending. Then before this seat, we have Ollen. Yeah, I'll work for them. We have Ollen Machimbirike. He's a vice president working in Verdant Capital Investment Management Division. He has exceptional experience completing investments in financial institutions in Africa. He's an expert in microfinance and also SPI auditor. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Well, I think to start off, I would like to ask the trade envoy to Kenya to just give us a brief background on how Kenya and UK, they are working together in terms of investments and any special message that you could be having. Okay, that's okay.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I'm delighted to be here on behalf of Rishi Sunak as the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, as the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Kenya and the UK government representative here at the Kenya Investment Summit. And it's wonderful to see many friends that I've recently seen in Nairobi just in the last few weeks on my most recent visit to Kenya. And let me start off by saying I'm delighted to be here today at the AFSIC conference for the 10th anniversary, which I think is a real testament to how much British capital is invested overseas in the continent. And Kenya is the market that I cover. So let me start off by saying that the United Kingdom is absolutely committed and remains one of Kenya's largest and most important foreign investors. We have British businesses spread across multiple sectors, contributing to the wider value chain of the economy. And I think it's always good to remind ourselves the scale of British investment. We have around 150 British companies currently working in Kenya, with over 250,000 Kenyans currently directly employed by British organisations. And bilateral trade between Kenya and the UK is estimated to be around £1.2 billion. And I'm particularly delighted to be here today as the Prime Minister has just announced that in April 2024, the UK is going to host the UK African Investment Summit in London. And this will be to strengthen UK-African partnerships with a focus on creating jobs and growth. And I really hope that Kenya will be participating in the summit next spring. And we've made huge progress on a number of green investment deals, which were agreed between Prime Minister Rishi Sunak with President Ruto at last year's COP27 summit. And if you add up the total of all of those deals which our two heads of state have signed, it adds up to nearly 500 Kenyan billion shillings, which is a huge amount of British capital going into Kenya. So firstly, can I thank a number of the UK companies involved in these deals in the room and for seeing the potential in the Kenyan market. And really my focus as the Prime Minister's trade envoy is to work with British businesses to try and remove any barriers to investment. And I just returned 2 weeks ago from a visit to Nairobi, and I was hosted by the British Chamber of Commerce and a number of cabinet ministers in the new Kenyan government. And we talked about ways to improve and facilitate business between our two countries. And two highlights of the deals that I recently signed, which I think would be of interest to delegates here today. And the first is our flagship investment in Nairobi Railway City. This is going to be a green regeneration project of central Nairobi. And I've been to see the site myself, where the new central railway station will be built and the bus rapid transit system. And I think that's a fantastic example of where the UK and Kenya are working together to build green technology and to significantly change the face of Kenya's capital city. And the second deal that I signed while I was there was for the Grand High Falls Dam. And that is a 425 billion Kenyan shilling investment on the Tana River. And it will generate 1,000 megawatts of hydroelectric power and irrigation for 400,000 hectares of farmland. And really we're working on that project to try and position Kenya to be a food surplus economy. So those are just some recent examples of active deals right now between our two countries. And I really do believe that British companies are positioned to play a pivotal role in the implementation of these projects, but also we have so many options for commercial avenues, whether it's through the supply chain, technical services, things like equipment. And I'm hoping that the Africa Investment Summit next spring will really help to promote the UK's trade investment and investing in Africa as a driver of economic growth. Because we know that that creates employment locally, it helps to alleviate poverty and helps to raise incomes. And the Africa Investment Summit will be a strategic platform to both connect the UK and Africa as a key investment destination, but also to highlight the profile of our African leaders and governments by promoting different investment opportunities from across our delegates. And lastly, I'd just like to touch on the Economic Partnership Agreement. I spent 3 years working on the negotiations for the EPA to be signed, and I'm really delighted that in 2021, the UK and Kenya did sign the Economic Partnership Agreement. We were the first non-African partner to have entered into such an agreement with Kenya, and I'd like to pay a tribute to the Kenyan government and particularly the State Department for Trade for their continued commitment to implementing the EPA. And I really do believe it's a great platform for enhanced economic partnership between the UK and Kenya and will provide impetus to promote and grow bilateral trade and investments. And for me, the core commitments of the EPA is really to eliminate existing import restrictions and to prohibit the adoption of future ones. And the businesses that I've met in Kenya on my many visits have told me that they are continuing now to benefit from the duty-free access to the UK market, which Kenya, of course, benefited from when the UK was a member of the EU, but it also means that we can continue to apply this across to UK exporters. So I'm here today to tell you that the UK government is absolutely committed to addressing key market access barriers. We want to address business environment issues, and we want to ensure that there is greater and deeper UK-Kenyan trade and investment. I think it's in all of our interests to have sustainable and inclusive economic growth. And finally, if we reflect on the fact that 600 million of Kenyan exports are sent to the UK every year, insured through the framework of the Economic Partnership Agreement, I think we can only look forward to more success and improved market access between both our countries. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And such a big, such a big sign of confidence on investing in Kenya. I'll start from far left, and I start with Ollen. You can tell us about yourself and the investments that you are doing in Kenya, and also you can give just a bit of a highlight about the finance sector of which you have been involved in investing.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, I'm Ollen, part of the funds team at Verdant, and we focus on providing hybrid capital in the form of subordinated debt, senior equity, non-dilutive to growth stage, tech-enabled financial institutions across the continent. Kenya has been one of the most active markets in our portfolio because of its large and most diversified financial services sector. You can look at the commercial banking space, the microfinance banking space, the credit-only microfinance institutions. We have seen that in Kenya there is a large number of credit-only microfinance institutions, and that has been a sweet spot for business. The reason why we're seeing a lot of good returns in the credit-only microfinance space. Commercial banks and microfinance banks, it's a bit challenging because they are permitted by the central bank to collect customer deposits. So we're sort of a bit squeezed on aligning on our pricing terms because they have large amounts of cheaper customer deposit funding. So credit-only space, we've been very active. We closed $7 million, 5.5 senior plus 1.5 subordinated debt to Mogo Kenya. Mogo Kenya is part of 11 Group in Europe, Luxembourg, and Mogo is focused on taxi financing. We see the taxi financing, they call them locally the borders, the two-wheeler motorcycles, where we funded the entire loan book is basically border financing plus cars, where on the cars they call it logbook financing, where if you're a business person who's running a small business, you want to borrow a loan from Mogo Kenya, you can use your car, you can borrow against your car as the collateral. So this is completely secured financing. Why did we do Mogo? Mogo is performing very well in terms of loan portfolio quality. We also have some credit enhancements, a parent guarantee from 11 Group, the holding company, and we also have 94% collateral coverage on the loan portfolio. From the social impact perspective, we see the border market or the tax market in Kenya and East Africa, West Africa is very common, just like in India and other countries.
It's okay. Okay, I think we'll come back to
okay, great.
Just the introductions.
Okay, thanks.
I'll go to Charlie. I'll go to Charlie, and you have been you have invested in Kenya in the last couple of years. Why Kenya?
It's a good question. I mean, the group that I represent invests across East Africa. We're invested in 12 different countries. But for us, Kenya is the number one country that we invest in. And I mean, the simple answer is Kenya has more opportunity. It's a more liquid market. Until recently, I would have said it was easier to handle Forex there, but I think there's been some challenges in the last sort of 6 to 12 months. But we found Kenya is a much easier investment destination than the neighbors. Tanzania, we've seen problems. There's been political change in a positive way recently, but under the Magufuli regime, that was not a place we would look to invest capital in. So for us, Kenya's, it's demonstrated a democratic, I think, and consistent sort of process over the last decades. But there's multiple sectors to invest in Kenya, and we've invested in the agri sector. For me, it's a very interesting area to invest in. Kenya is one of 4 countries in the world that I think really offers absolutely world-class agricultural investments. You sit on the equator, as you said. It's a tropical highland. You have an almost ideal climate to produce all sorts of things. So, and I think to Theo's point on trade with Britain, I mean, certainly most people in this room have probably eaten Kenyan produce in this country. So we're a big supplier of the UK. So for me, it's certainly an easier place to operate than the rest of the region. And I think that's backed up by, I work in the private equity industry, 69%, I think, of all private equity investment flows into East Africa have been into Kenya. And when you think of Ethiopia on the doorstep, Uganda next door, Tanzania, Kenya's swallowing almost 3/4 of all foreign direct capital inflows into East Africa. I think that says a lot.
Well, that's nice. So I got Mr. Shaw. It has been it's a decades. It's decades that you have been in Kenya, been ICT, aviation, energy. Is there a limit? Maybe you can say, as you introduce yourself, is there a limit to the possibilities of investment opportunities? Is there, because I've seen you're in energy, you're in aviation, you're in ICT, that means you're quite versatile. What is this that makes you to be able to spot these opportunities?
Good afternoon, everyone. I think one thing that's not been mentioned is workforce. Kenya has a very, very educated workforce. I'll give you one example. There's a manufacturing company who's got a plant in Ethiopia and a plant in Kenya. The turnover of staff in Ethiopia is 40%. In Kenya, same company, 2%. And that's all about education, it's all about commitment, it's all about wanting to work. And I think that's a big plus, because I have worked right across what I call Black Africa. I don't know the Arab Francophone a little less. But Kenya and maybe Zimbabwe, the workforce is top-notch. So those who are looking at possibly investing into Kenya, thank you. I would really recommend it. Okay, when I joined Wilken in 1992, Mr. Moderator, there were 45 members of staff and 12 expats. Today we're 250 staff and 1 expat. And that's because we have found very, very educated Kenyans returning home, but also I think our educational system is fantastic. So that is a reassurance for those who are looking at it. I think, our envoy to Kenya, Theo Clark, thank you for coming, by the way. She's emphasizing the focus into Kenya from the British. We clearly are seeing a lot more activity, although I'm Kenyan born but British background. There's a lot more activity coming from other countries around the world. Wilken is working with a Portuguese company, German company, a Turkish company and a Japanese company. And I can assure you they're not all coming into Kenya for the fun of it. They see real benefit and opportunity. So I think on those few remarks, I'll hand back to you, Mr. Moderator.
That's okay. To Mr. Adi, why internet? Or why get into that space of internet? Do you think we are at the optimal levels in terms of internet, or do you think there's still opportunities, and do you think there are other what you can call opportunistic investments that can come about the internet?
I mean,
I think you can use that.
yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. There's a massive opportunity for providing internet, and it's certainly an underserved market. So if you look across the entire of sub-Saharan Africa, internet adoption is about 20% of the population. And when you dig further into that, the vast majority of people who are online use a tiny, tiny amount of internet. And so, in Kenya, you have this great, huge telecom company called Safaricom. But even there, we have these tiny, tiny levels of adoption. And so solving that problem is both a huge commercial opportunity, but it's also a huge social opportunity. Because the internet is a facilitator for so many things now, whether it's social inclusion, whether it's business, whether it's education. Fundamentally, people have to be online, and if you're on the wrong side of that digital divide, then you're simply without. So the internet is a fundamental requirement now for people, not a nice to have. Now, by putting that in place, that then creates all sorts of other opportunities, whether those be social opportunities or those be business opportunities. But to Graham's point, we have this very young, tech-savvy workforce that can't get online. So we need to solve that problem, and by getting that on, getting people online, that creates all of these other businesses, and you're starting now to see people like Microsoft and these other big tech companies coming into Kenya, or coming into the continent, but many of them are coming in through Kenya. So we absolutely see a huge requirement there.
Wow. That's like, Madeline, I would just say, one of the things that other governments keeps on saying is about agriculture and how, and I like it has been mentioned that most of the produce that are here, some of them come out of Kenya. But how can capital flows be unlocked in that space?
Okay, yeah. So I founded Adapter Earth from exactly the premise that you're referring to. Given that after many years of banking, about 28 years in leading both Tier 1 and Tier 2 banks regionally, the portion that goes to fund agri flows, the portion that goes in our portfolios to actually fund agriculture as a sector was never anything above a double-digit percentage. It was always 7%, in a good year, possibly 9% of the total portfolio across Africa, where I led SMEs for 10 markets as the regional head. Now, the unfortunate bit would be that then about 70 to 80% of that ended up in strained book, what we'd call stressed account management portfolio, because of production failure and other risks. Now, that's being aggravated currently by the vagaries of climate change, and that means that could go all the way downhill if the financial services industry will not address that already strained relationship. And so agriculture being a mainstay, and I think everyone in the room does know that, in fact, it's the mainstay for most economies in sub-Saharan Africa. And at one point, I was actually heading the global strategy team for emerging markets at Standard Chartered, and realized even the rest of tropics had the same issue across even other markets like Southeast Asia and the like. So it is actually a position that I needed and someone needed to address in terms of how can capital be unlocked for this sector, because much as banks want to lend to the sector, there's still the bad book resulting out of that intention or actual action. And so one of the ways that we set out to do at Adapter, one of the ways we set out to handle this is to actually create database algorithms that are a methodology for risk assessment for agriculture that helps the financial industry or the banks, actually, tier 1, 2, and 3 banks, to score risk in agriculture from an informed perspective. So that using climate data, water, soil, and biodiversity scores, indexes under those about soil health, water capacity, and the rest, bankers are able to at least get an informed perspective of the actual risk, both inherent and also that are being aggravated by climate change. And then from that platform, then agriculture can be funded, but also we created a tool that creates adaptation plans so that as they lend to agriculture, there is also an adaptation plan to sort of soften the blow, to sort of mitigate the risk that is prevalent in that sector.
I like that. So I just come to an honorable member, Sir Tio Clark. So, and I think you talked well about what are the government plans, how you see about the UK investments plans, but where do the private sector dovetail into this?
Thank you. Well, firstly, it's fantastic to see so many businesses in the room investing in Kenya and to hear from the panel. I think one of the things I'd like to stress, I talked about the Africa Investment Summit, but the other thing I should say that the Prime Minister's really focused on is on green energy. So when I was first appointed as the trade envoy under a different government, it was just ahead of the negotiations leading up to the UK hosting Glasgow and COP26. And it was very clear that the government was moving away from investing in fossil fuels, and we were given a specific directive to go and find renewable projects to invest in each of our markets. And I have to say, Kenya, in comparison to some of the other trade envoys I've spoken to in different markets, has really been leading the way in terms of their commitment to tackling climate change and renewables. So if I look at my list of projects which the British government is investing in, it is really clear that green energy is kind of top of the list, if you like, of the top priority projects that we're investing in. I mentioned Nairobi Railway City, and that's planned to be a net zero carbon neutral project when the station is built. But just to give you another example, on a recent visit last year, I went out to visit Malindi on the coast to see the largest solar farm which is being built in that part of Africa. And that was being funded by a British company with Globalec and had investment from CDC, now British International Investment. And that's a really good example of where the British government is basically investing directly in projects like that in Kenya. And we are responsible for a huge number of homes now being powered from the solar panels in Malindi, and that's because of a partnership between the UK and the Kenyan governments. So I personally see that as a future area for growth. I think the new president is similarly as committed to that agenda. I think the fact that President Ruto hosted the Africa Climate Summit just in September really demonstrates to me that Kenya is really at the forefront in the continent of focusing on green energy, and that very much aligns with the UK government's priorities, and those are project deals that I will certainly be focusing on.
Thanks. Before I ask them a questions, I would like an assistance. If anyone would have a question, if anyone would have a question, I think I can be able to pick it up now, and then before we go back to the panelists. Okay, so can I use the mic? Another mic? Okay, it's okay. We can. It's okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a simple question, is as an investment summit and looking at the current issues in Kenya, both financial and political as a result, is commercial quantities of oil were discovered over 10 years ago, and there is no production. Could someone on the panel please give an indication of when it will be done, why it's taken so long when oil prices have been at a very high level. This would resolve quite a few issues with the deficit issues in Kenya.
I guess as I've got the microphone, I'll make a start on that. I assume you're referring to the Tullow oil discovery in Lake Turkana. My understanding is it's marginal as a field, and I'm not sure that it is what the industry would describe as sort of fully economic. But I think the point is well made. Why hasn't there been more progress with this? I have to say, I think a lot of responsibility lies at the hands of the last administration, the Kenyatta administration, who I think misunderstood if you like, the scale of the opportunity. I think they thought that this was a huge bonanza, and I think there was a lot of negative political influence in the development of the Turkana oil project. And there was a lot of bullying towards sort of first oil and doing it in a way that wasn't actually economically sensible. But I think will it be developed as a field? I think one of the biggest challenges there is, I'm not sure it is big enough. The other, I think, is that Tullow, and I hope there's no one from Tullow in the room, but I think Tullow Oil have had their own fair share of problems. So I think the blame can also rest sort of at Tullow Oil's sort of feet. I don't think they've had the balance sheet. I think they've had problems elsewhere in Africa. So I think it's one to watch. I certainly wouldn't bet on that field being developed.
Okay, you just want to
just to
mention
add
about
a little
that?
bit more. It's not, honestly, it's very commercially neutral, but the real problem they have is that it's a heavy-duty oil, and they would have to transport it to refine it to bring it back. We don't have a refinery operation in Kenya, so I don't think it's commercially viable at the moment. Uganda, I can give you Uganda. They've also identified oil, but there seems to be a lot of commercial discussion as to how we transport it out. Pipelines through Tanzania, through Kenya. I think just going forward, and we've talked about a lot of renewables in this meeting, is it a long-term viable solution? I think it's very marginal. I hope that's answered your question.
Thanks. I'll pick other questions. I think we can pick two.
Hi, Mambo Vipi. Great to be here at the panel. I'm not on the panel, I'm standing over here. The whole day in this room, every single country session comes and tells us, oh, my country is the best country to invest in, and so on, and you hear the same thing nonstop. Looking at Kenya, Graham, I believe, you were comparing other countries in East Africa. Guy in the suit, what's your name? Charlie, you're comparing other countries within the Eastern African region. I'd just love to understand your point of view directly. So you talk about Kenya being a place for large trade. If you look recently, like large dollar shortage across Africa. The dollar is the world's trading currency. There's large trade deficits. In Kenya specifically, you see a large demand for dollars that's not being supplied right now. And it's a big problem. You see the currency de-risk and devalue significantly over the last couple of months, way more. And right now the pound to Kenyan shilling is quite painful for many people. And therefore, if you're collecting revenues in Kenyan shillings and trying to repatriate that funds back to the UK, it becomes a problem and becomes challenging. So how do you see Kenya overriding that over the next several months? And you talk about stability within the region. While there has been realistic challenges that have been going on in Kenya that make it difficult to scale operations and businesses. We have an office in Kenya. We have 40 employees in Kenya in our Kenyan team. And how do you see like political stability within the region directly? I work in the financial services space. Optimizing for licenses with financial service providers with the Central Bank of Kenya takes a lot longer in Kenya versus other East African countries. Now you can argue that Kenya is more developed, sure, and receives more money for investment, sure. But if you look at population sizes and growing places, you see places like Tanzania with a larger population than Kenya, with a faster growing middle class than Kenya, with more borders than Kenya, right? So how do you see those two develop over time, especially over the next 5 to 10 years, with market sizes getting bigger and regional neighbors, while Kenya still leads, how will Kenya override that in the future, specifically with the dollar challenges?
Thank you. I mean, there's no doubt that I think the whole of East Africa's got a dollar challenge at the moment. I think where Kenya can be sort of taken slightly to one side is that they do have more exports than a lot of their peers. So dollar restrictions are rare in Kenya. In my 14-year career of investing in Kenya, I have only once, and that's in the last 12 months, seen the sort of environment we're seeing today where access to $100,000 in the banking system is difficult. Whereas I've seen it in Tanzania far more frequently. In Ethiopia, good luck. In the rest of the region, it's often a problem. We work in Angola. In Angola, our business was not able to access dollars for 3 years. So on a relative basis, I think Kenya, it is certainly easier. But to your point, how does it compare with Tanzania, with similar populations? To me, Kenya isn't an easy place to work. I will be honest, but nor is any country in Africa. Tanzania seems to go through a pattern. It goes through a pro or open perspective for 5 years, and then it seems to close down and become insulated and frankly quite xenophobic towards the outside world. So we've seen this as a pattern over years in Tanzania. Right now, I think we've got great leadership in Tanzania. I think the next 5 years are interesting for Tanzania. But I also know that within the next 10 years, Tanzania will go backwards. Of that, I am convinced. There is a pendulum that swings in Tanzania. And so we can sort of march in there today, but I would be warned of what happens in the next decade. Kenya, slightly different story. I mean, the volatility between the way the government works, whether it's the current government or the previous government, tends to be far more moderate. But to your point on the financial services and getting licenses, I can believe it's complicated in Kenya. Kenya is overbanked. There are far too many banks in Kenya and financial institutions. So if I was the Kenyan government, I would make it difficult. But I've certainly personally had far more challenges working in Tanzania than I have in Kenya. So I'm a believer in Kenya, but I would caveat that, there are challenges. And you need to look at your sector, you need to look at the scale of what you're doing, whether it's political, but these are all common problems that you have to look at across sub-Saharan Africa.
Thanks. I just want to pick one question, a follow-up to Mr. Ollen. There's a question that have been talked about Kenya being overbanked, regulations of the financial institutions, the fact that a shake-up may be needed. What do you think, because of the current, you're investing in financial institutions, and of late the government has come and started regulation, especially on the credit-only microfinances?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So, yeah, I agree. We see so many players in the financial service space in Kenya. But that has actually created a lot of opportunities for us. As I mentioned, the sweet spot for us is the credit-only microfinance institutions. Of course, we have tight underwriting rules and procedures to follow within our firm. We actually don't see any problems with with the government implementing the measures in the credit-only microfinance space to have the for those institutions to have the DCP licenses. For example, I'll give you an example. Our investee Mogo Kenya is already applied for that DCP license and waiting for the outcome. It doesn't affect the regulatory capital requirements. So I don't think the requirement for the DCP license is for for the microfinance space is a challenging issue, unless the new measures get something to do with the regulatory capital requirements. Then yes, I think from my view, I think it's the DCP issue is a minor issue to deal with. So many microfinance institutions they've applied for for such a license. We we emphasize to our investees to make sure that they comply with the the local requirements or local requests from the local authorities, and that is what our investees are doing. So, yeah, I mean, it's
Okay, yeah, well answered. I don't know if there's any other question. I'll go to Mr. Adi, and what do you think is the future of investments, especially in technology space?
That's quite a big open question. Have I got like half an hour or something? I mean, the technology value chain, there's a sort of series of things that build up on top of each other. Yeah? So, my business, Power Internet, we're focused on providing the kind of the infrastructure and the basic connectivity services. But on top of that, you're going to get into things like software, the various applications and services. I think the gentleman at the back is in the fintech sector from joining the dots there. People like that need connectivity. We need people who are building the software. We need people who are building, all those applications on top of these things. So you have a kind of series of steps that the industry is going to go through. First, we need the infrastructure. Secondly, we need people who can build software. We need people who have the education and the know-how to do that. There's a whole bunch of sort of organizations springing up inside of Kenya. I'm sure they are across the continent, but I know the market in Kenya well. Training the software engineers necessary to develop the applications. And what needs to then happen is, you can bring in some smart guy from Silicon Valley, but they don't understand the context of what's going on in the local market. So you need people who are going to build applications and services that are relevant to the local market, and generally you need the local teams to do that.
I like that. So Madeleine, agriculture being the mainstay of most economics of Sub-Saharan Africa, how is the climate finance landscape looking like today? Our Honorable said that the government is quite keen on climate and sustainable. How does it pan out? How is the landscape looking like?
Yeah, and I think that question really also lends itself to the former question about technology. I think technology data has a very big role to play to kind of innovate the kind of finance that then would flow towards agriculture as a sector. And also to the earlier question about, financial services and the cookie cutter sort of, same shoes, size fits everybody approach that the financial services industry is currently adopting. I think there needs to be a lot of, not reinventing, but sort of shaping the industry and the financial flows to address specific sectors, specific problems that exist in the market, in the current environment that we are having. I think it's very important that for capital flows to unlock towards agri-sector, there's a big role that data and tech plays in order to really leverage on pathways that can actually make it possible because it's very slow currently, and you can understand the hesitance. But really, I think there are some tier 3 banks and SACCOs, cooperatives, MFIs, that are really reshaping themselves and seeing, when I think back in my younger banking days, Equity saw an opportunity and said they are going to bank there and bank. Today, I think there are players, and especially credit unions, and those who are really in touch with the actual producers on the ground, who are starting to reshape themselves in the way that's really relevant and speaking to the problem. And I think that's the way I think capital has to reinvent itself. I'd call it finovation, innovating finance, finovation, finance innovation. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Shaw. I know you said about how you have invested. You've talked about Ethiopia. You've talked about Kenya. You've talked about labor turnover. And I'll ask the same question. where do you see the future of Kenya? How do you see it?
There was a very good question at the back there that, you know, everyone who stands up here, no matter what country they're in, we've got the best country. Wilken is in 7 countries in Africa. Charlie was talking about Angola. We've just opened up in Maputo in Mozambique. Opportunities are there. Political stability is one of the key, I think, fundamentals. Everyone talks about the big C, corruption. The most corrupt country I'm working in at the moment is Congo. And I'm sorry if anyone hears from Congo, but it's just it's off the scale. Kenya, we do have a judicial system. We do have some strict morals, but everywhere, can I be honest, everywhere there is an element of corruption, and I don't think the West are clean either. So in my view, it's the stability of Kenya. It's never been at war. Can you just give me a country outside of Kenya that's not been at war? I don't think there is one. Can you? Where? Zambia. I correct myself. I do correct, because my wife, my sister lives in Zambia. Tanzania did have a war. They had a coup in Zanzibar, and there was after independence there was some. So I'm just talking about conflict. Can we just talk about conflict? So that's probably, we can have a discussion afterwards, but it's one of the reasons why I think Kenya has got a step above. But that's my view. I've opened 2 offices in Tanzania, and I've closed 2. Okay, because we were, I think you call it xenophobia, we were chased out. So I don't think those kind of issues are witnessed in Kenya, but let's not be foolish. You know, there are problems there. One of the things I'm really pushing for in the chamber and everything else is policy. Let's have predictable policies going forward. We can't keep changing it every other year or when a governor comes in. I really would like to see a little bit more predictability on policy. And just to conclude, give you an idea, we're just about to spend a lot of money putting a fiber from Mombasa to Malaba. Where are we doing it? We're doing it on the MGR, on the old British Railway. Why? Because there's one landlord. But you can understand what's going to happen with the internet explosion, particularly with a big undersea cable landing in Mtwapa, Nyali. To Africa cable is coming in, obviously led by Facebook. It's going to quadruple the bandwidth into Kenya. They're not doing it for CSR purposes. So we're lucky, we're geographically in the right location, we're on the equator, we're GMT +3, let's take advantage of it. But it does come with issues, as we've all mentioned. So thank you, moderator.
Okay, thanks. Honorable Tio, you'd like to comment something? I think your mic is working. Oh,
Can people hear me? Do I need the microphone? Oh, I'm being picked up. And I just wanted to pick up on a few points. Firstly, I absolutely agree with what Graham said, firstly on the educated workforce in Kenya. And I wanted to pick up on the question about why Kenya. And obviously, there are trade envoys in other markets, I should say, including Tanzania. But for me, the reason I really think Kenya is the place to invest British capital is firstly this workforce point, that it's really quite unusual for the continent to have such a good level of a skilled workforce that's ready and available labour. Secondly, I think this political stability point is really important. That is not the case across a lot of African markets. But also the point I wanted to touch on was also it's about political leadership and commitment to tackling the ease of business. So one thing I've been really struck by working as trade envoy with both the government under Kenyatta and the new government under Ruto is that when I meet with the Cabinet Secretary for Trade and Investment, I can really see practical, tangible examples of where they are trying to remove barriers to business. And for me, that's kind of the proof of the pudding. Is the government prepared to bring in bills or amendments or things which will really make a practical difference to companies on the ground? And just to sort of give you 2 examples of where I've been working. So the British Chamber of Commerce has done some fantastic work on a thing called the Business Integrity Index. I launched it for them in Nairobi with their chair. And one of the things it's trying to do is to make the case that British companies are really a safe investment in Kenya. And Graham mentioned about tackling corruption. As a representative of the British government, I don't shy away from having those difficult conversations. Every time I meet with a Kenyan minister, I make the point that British investors want to know their money is being well spent. They want to be able to trace every penny and every British pound. And that is something that I do think makes us different and makes us a different competitor from, say, Chinese money or other investors. So that is a USP that I'm always selling, that British investment is safe and sound. But also I think Kenya has set up a number of different agencies to help British businesses. So for example, 2 weeks ago, when I was in Nairobi, I went to visit Keninvest with the Principal Secretary for Investments. And I was really struck going into their offices how they'd really made a concerted effort to make it quite easy to register and set up a business. So literally on one floor in the same building, you could go from speaking to somebody without even an appointment. I mean, I turned up and there were Turkish, Middle Eastern investors who were sat in the lobby waiting to meet with advisors. And it was everything from how do you literally register your business, get a sort of an address and a company number, how do you then deal with the tax system, everything from where should I live in Nairobi, where should my children go to school. This is not something that every country in Africa is offering. So I think that's a real commitment from the Kenyan government that they are trying to make it easy. You talked, Charlie, about it is difficult for businesses to invest in the continent. If you're predominantly used to working in, for example, the European market, putting your toe in Africa is a big strategic shift. But I do think if you're looking at investing in Africa, Kenya is probably the top destination that I would choose in terms of ease of business, political stability, and having an educated workforce.
So, Charlie, what are the challenges? I think all is not, we can't say all is sweet. And maybe we may need to be a bit, when you come about to become a bit authentic. But what could be the challenges that you have had when you invest in Kenya, and how did you navigate about it?
Thank you. So I think one of the big challenges in Kenya today is actually a legacy issue from the previous government. They over-indebted the country. They misspent a lot of the capital. The worst thing you can do is borrow money and misspend it, because paying it back becomes increasingly difficult if there's no sort of generation of capital to pay back. And I'm afraid I think the previous regime have utterly misspent a lot of the Euro bonds that they raised them too easily, and they spent them too easily. And I think what you're seeing now is a government who are new to the job, and they've got an awful lot of work to do. They've got to find a way to not default on their debt, and Kenya's credit rating is under question. They've obviously risen taxes significantly in the last sort of 3 or 4 months, and it's hurting us and all our businesses. But do I resent it? I resent the misappropriation of capital in the last regime. The current government have to raise taxes. I don't judge them on what they're doing. They need to, because they've got to pay for a hole in their budget. So we do have some tough times ahead. These tax rises are going to be there for the medium term. And I think the cost of doing business has gone up. But it's not easy anywhere at the moment. You're hearing that in the UK. You're hearing it all over Europe. The cost of doing business globally has gone up. But where I think there is if you like, a glimmer of hope in this is the cost of capital is a critical component of doing business. And in Africa, traditionally in the last 10 years, you'll pay somewhere between 8 and probably 12% to borrow dollars in a commercial context. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on concessional finance. But what you're seeing today is the cost of capital in Africa is probably 9 to 13. You're seeing this cost of capital go from 1 to 2% in the West to 5 to 6%. So in fact, the spread, if you like, or the margin between the West and Africa is closing, which is going to make actually my life easier in comparing my performance as an investment manager, if you like, with a Western business. So I think we're going to see an interesting leveling in the next 10 years in terms of business performance. I mean, how does the government fix or, if you like, improve the situation for business? I think Graham's right. I think they have to stick to a consistent course policies that we all can understand. And I do think they've got to focus on corruption. I think corruption has developed over the last sort of administration to a point where I think it hasn't been got under control. And I think the new government do need to build capacity. And I mean, you were talking rightly about the skills in Kenya. There are some fantastic skills in Kenya, but I don't think enough of them are in government. So for me, government needs to build more capacity over the next, this term. And I think there are signs that they will do that. And I hope they continue to build.
Thanks. Before I come back to you for the final comment, I don't know whether in the audience there are questions. Mercy.
All right. My question is for the UK envoy. You said that UK government have programs to support British businesses looking to export. What I see often with these programs is that they primarily support medium to large enterprises. As a small business owner in this country, focus on Africa, what programs are there to support small businesses who want to export their services, tech, to Kenya?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to hear that you are interested in investing in Kenya. You're right, there has traditionally been a focus on very sort of large deals. Obviously, the ones I gave in my speech, we're talking about hundreds of millions of British pounds. In fact, one of the priorities that I brought in when I was previously appointed as the trade envoy back in 2019 was to actually ask that question. My background as an entrepreneur, before I was a politician, I set up and sold a small business myself, and I really agreed with you that there really wasn't enough stuff in the pipeline. So firstly, we have asked that question. We are trying to do more. But I think there's a couple of different British investment strands that you can reach out to. Obviously, CDC is now British International Investments. We have UK Export Finance. And if you haven't yet met with your regional representative from the Department for Business and Trade, and I work for Kemeny Badenoch, the Secretary of State for the department, and there are regional representatives who can sort of be your link into the department to get advice and specialist expertise on how to export. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that we've talked a lot today about sort of trade and investment, but I think it's important to know that the UK's aid budget is also doing a huge amount in Kenya to help with creating the right business environment. So to give you an example, and I see that UK Aid is one of the lead sponsors of today's conference, we've been one of the landmark investors in a project called Trademark East Africa, and that project has done a lot of work in Kenya on trying to reduce bureaucracy for businesses. So to give you an example, they've been working in the port of Mombasa to basically digitize the products and the customs procedures. So whereas you might have had cargo stuck in transit for maybe 2 weeks in the port, which is crazy when you're transporting live chickens, cut vegetables and flowers, you simply cannot have cargo being held up for 14 days in the port. And they've managed to reduce that with TMEA's programs to either a couple of days or in some instances hours. And so there's a lot of work going on by the British government in different parts of government, whether it's within the Foreign Office or within the overseas aid budget, which is all trying to help with reducing burdens on businesses so that you can invest and trade freely with Kenya.
Another question?
Thank you. I think my question probably is directed to Trade Envoy, but of course anybody in the panel can answer this. When it comes to investing, signaling is very important. And if you track back to the time when the late President Kibaki became president, there was a shift from the historical traditional special relationship between Kenya and the UK. For example, there was a shift to the east. Kenyatta continued the shift to the east. And Ruto seems to have shifted to the west. So, there's a beauty parade that just took place in Silicon Valley. And there's a very proactive approach by the U.S. ambassador to really market Kenya and actually handhold the new government, talking to investors directly, having a very well curated program to make Americans interested in Kenya. And I wonder whether, either there's something lost in translation, but there seems to be something there. And I just wonder, what are those concrete steps just to enable, the UK-Kenya relationship, investment, business-to-business conversations to take place? But somehow it seems to be missing. Or if it is very understated. So that's why I'm directing it to Trade Envoy.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I should say that the Prime Minister has a number of trade envoys across markets, but certainly not every country in Africa. So the fact that Kenya has been specifically chosen by Rishi Sunak shows that it's a priority for him as an investment market. What I would say is that there's been a lot of work actually already going on. I was previously in this role under Boris Johnson, and I was recently reappointed under Rishi Sunak. And obviously during COVID, I spent a huge amount of my time doing things like getting Kenya off the red list, making sure that British Airways flights could take off and be delivering fresh fruit and vegetables to supermarkets in my constituency and across the UK. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, which you don't necessarily see unless I'm speaking in the chamber, talking about things like that publicly. But also we have been doing a lot of public engagement. So I co-hosted with the Kenyan government 18 months ago a UK-Kenya roadshow. And what we did was we brought over a number of the Kenyan ministers in the previous administration, but also a number of the agencies like the KRA to basically come to British towns. We went to Glasgow, we went to Manchester, we went to London, and we tried to provide, as the government, that matchmaking facility between British businesses being able to talk directly to members of the Kenyan government or from the various agencies that they'd have to deal with. And back to my earlier point, if you are a new investor in Africa or in Kenya as a market, let's be honest, it is quite bureaucratic. It is difficult to navigate as a new investor. So what we're trying to do is to make those points of introduction. And I'm very keen to do regular visits. I try and go every few months out to my markets to meet directly with members of the cabinet. Obviously, we've just had a reshuffle this week since I just returned from Nairobi, but I'm pleased to see that the Principal Secretary for Investments is still in post, even if he has a new Cabinet Secretary. But that's personal relationships that I'm building on behalf of the UK government with those individual ministers, and we're absolutely committed between now and April to making sure that we're getting these projects over the line ahead of the summit. Because the fact that the Prime Minister is hosting the second ever African Investment Summit, I think really shows you this is a political priority for number 10.
I think we'll go down with, as we close, maybe final remarks from Charlie. Your final remarks.
Well, thank you. I think Kenya has an interesting sort of next 12 months. For those of you who are looking to invest in the country, I think we probably have the toughest 12 months in the last decade to look forward to, or to not look forward to. But I do believe in the sort of tenacity of Kenya, and I believe in the initiatives that are taking place internationally. So the British government's engagement, I think Meg Whitman, the US ambassador, taking President Ruto to Silicon Valley, real testament to the international community in the West to really build a relationship with Kenya. I think that's going to be constructive for Kenya. I think Kenya's really put itself on the, if you like, out as a salesman at the moment. And I think now is the time to do that. So I'm quite confident that we'll get through the next 12 months. They're not going to be easy. But I think we should then start to see some growth come back into the Kenyan economy. And I think, the future's going to be interesting.
Heidi?
Yeah, maybe just to build on that. The next few months, there's going to be some potential shocks in the system, but I think the fundamentals are being laid down and are kind of there. So, we've invested significantly in Kenya. We're going to continue to invest significantly in Kenya. There are some headwinds around things like currency. There's been inflationary pressures. The government has some significant debts to clear out. But underneath that, you have all the right kind of ingredients for, you know, a very potent kind of economy to invest into. So, you know, I don't think Kenya's unique in having some of those shorter term challenges, but when you look at the stuff that's going on under the surface, I think it's very, very solid to build on.
Madly.
Okay, so I'm deeply convinced that a real opportunity exists to actually scale finance and capital flows towards agriculture. I think there is a method to the chaos that currently exists in terms of the wild risk that exists in that sector. But I think the mission here is to just ensure that the tier 1 banks, which really have the capability to scale, have climate adaptation products developed for them that then they can pass on to have SACCOs and the other players, you know, credit unions that are in touch with the smallholder farmers on the ground, be able, through also TA support, leveraging on that support, be able actually to propagate that finance towards the people who need it most. And of course, capacity building for farmers. You know, the reverse psychology of that is that so much information has been thrown at farmers, you know, farmers this, farmers that, train, give information, give data, give mobile phones and smart technologies to farmers. And then the farmers are wondering, but where is the money? So I think if we deal with it from the backside of the problem, capacitize the banks, we are actually, sorry to toot the adapter horn so loudly, but there's a reason I left a very large bandwidth position to actually, you know, I retired early to build this, because I'm convinced that tier 1 banks need to be given products, develop products that then they can pass on, you know, the goodness down up to the farmer. So there's a real opportunity to scale, but through talking to the owners of capital. So thank you.
Mr. Shaw.
Thank you. Healthcare, agriculture, those two sectors I think have a real opportunity for investments. Healthcare, why are our Kenyans going to Dubai or South Africa? We need to upgrade and lift our healthcare capability. Agriculture, pyrethrum, cotton, all big money earners in the old days. They've all disappeared. Let's bring it back. So maybe with British government, we can look at that opportunity. But the country has got a financial debt. I'm going to speak out publicly here. There's an easy fix. Reduce costs, but more importantly, maybe sell off a strategic asset. Not 100%, but maybe we sell off Kenya Ports for 40%. And Kenya Ports, I'm guessing, is worth $10 billion. Sell off 40%, bring $4 billion, we've cleared our Eurobond. It's an idea. People have shouted me down, it's a strategic asset. But how else are we going to fix the problem? I think it's an easy fix. And everyone said, we can't do that. Safaricom is partly owned by the Kenyan government. Safaricom produces so much in dividends, workforce, everything. So why don't we just break that down, and we can maybe also remove the cartels from certain areas. So that's my easy fix.
Mr. Ollen?
You're allowed to.
All right, just a few words. I mean, yeah, for Kenya, I think, you know, keep driving, you know, a friendly, you know, environment. I think 3 things from us. We like the pace at which you're growing the, you know, the financial inclusion space, because, you know, our target is to reach, you know, the financially, you know, excluded, you know, people in the, you know, in the country. Keep maintaining, you know, a friendly regulatory environment. And yeah, I mean, yeah, that's it. Thanks.
So, as I recap, my name is Paul Kamau. Finaltus, we say we know Africa. In case of any investment inquiry, in case of any investment opinion, any investment need, we have advised different kind of set of investors and investees, and we are always available for any call, for any inquiries, and will help you to navigate Africa. God bless.
Graham.